I was a very bookish sort of a kid. I was uncomfortable with sport, I was uncomfortable with my peers, and so I would escape to the library and write stories. And this made me realise that we are designed to learn, that learning is natural and effortless when we are doing things that are important and relevant to us.
All right, our next speaker is Liliane Grace. She has flown all the way from Melbourne to be here tonight to support Suli in his incredible event. And she is an author, and she has written 2 books, from what I understand, 4 books, but two books around one specific area. And she's the founder of something called the Mastery Club, a business called the Mastery Club, and her first book around that is also called the Mastery Club, and the second one's called the Hidden Order. And she's going to share all the incredible work that she's doing. She's actually doing some amazing work around universal laws and human behavior, and introducing a lot of that content into the school system to really help kids set goals and stick to their visions and work towards achieving what they really would love to be doing in their lives as well. In some ways similar to Jamie, but also there's lots of differences there too, so you're going to hear some incredible content from her. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Liliane to you guys.
Thanks, Greg. Hi. It's wonderful to be here. I love the education theme. I home educated my 3 kids, which was a wonderful and very challenging adventure. I could absolutely relate to your videos, Suli. And I wanted to start by telling a little bit about that. You know, I was a very bookish sort of a kid. I was uncomfortable with sport, I was uncomfortable with my peers, and so I would escape to the library and write stories. And I was particularly escaping, kids like Eric, this big hulking boy in year 11 who liked to tease and muck around. I remember looking at him and thinking, what are you doing here? You should be on a farm doing something with your body, and come to books later, if ever. Well, when my son was born, my first child, I happened to meet a home educating family. And when I saw the creative chaos in their home, I loved it. They were kids up trees and cooking in the kitchen and games all over the floor, and it was wonderful. It was very rich, and I got excited and thought, right, I'm going to do this with my kids. And I had visions of them all sitting around the kitchen table reading and working through books, and they were going to be ahead of all the other kids their age at school, So I started teaching my son to read. And then we kind of got busy just doing life. We went to the beach, we went to the park, we're doing bits and pieces. And 9 months later, I thought, I better go back to that reading thing, And he had improved out of sight. I was staggered. We hadn't been reading for 9 months, And this made me realise that we are designed to learn, that learning is natural and effortless when we are doing things that are important and relevant to us. And the same experience happened with my daughter. She was terrible at spelling. A year or so later, she was really pretty good at spelling. We hadn't done any spelling lists, we hadn't done any spelling bees. How did that happen? My other daughter had this interesting kind of brand of dyslexia, where you read more fluently when the book is upside down or back to front. Well, likewise with her, she had no interest or desire to read. If she'd been in school, she would have been labelled. But we didn't label her, I just encouraged her to read a little tiny bit every day, and other than that, I waited. And you know what? She was 12 years old before she really came to reading. But then she became the most voracious reader in the family, and she was burning through novels, this thick. So this was all, very, very interesting, very fascinating stuff to me. My kids, loving stories, but none of them took to study and books. And I think maybe the unspoken prayer that I had, that my kids would find their bodies before they found books, might have had something to do with it, because I'd always been uncomfortable in my own skin. And so I wanted them to have the freedom of their bodies. And so they did. My son is a personal trainer, and my 2 daughters are circus students today. And I tell you what, there are definitely huge gaps in their education. But you know what? There are huge gaps in my memory of my education. I did 12 years of standard schooling. I came out of it as a straight A student in a Dux of Humanities because that information-based style of learning worked for me. But if you tried to test me now, I'm sure I'd flunk. And I didn't really enjoy it that much. You know Sir Ken Robinson, that creativity expert, and he says it's more important that we do what interests us creatively, rather than regurgitate information. And our changing world, our rapidly changing world, is calling out a new set of qualities and skills. It's requiring that we be creative, that we be lateral thinkers, that we be able to find information rapidly when we need it. I'll tell you a very interesting story, because the relevance of what we're learning is a key theme. My son, when he was 14, decided that he was terrible at maths. Now, I actually didn't think he was terrible at maths. He was much faster calculating than me. But in his perception, he was terrible at maths, and our perception is everything, isn't it? And so I enrolled the reluctant kid into a tutorial program to learn maths. And they tested him up in that environment as being grade 3 maths level. Now, at the time, he was a very sulky, explosive, aggressive sort of teenager, and so I asked a friend who was a staircase builder if he'd take my son in for some work experience. And so my son went there, and you know what? I will never forget the light in his eyes at the end of that first day when I picked him up. He was shining. He'd been doing real work with the men, stuff that was important, that mattered. And that was a big eye-opener for me. This builder guy said to me, you know what? His maths is better than the year 10 boys that come from the local schools for work experience. And so that made me realise that when we're doing work that is real, that is important, that matters, we become responsible. We take it seriously, we do our best. There's schools nowadays, more and more schools that are taking kids overseas to build orphanages and build schools in Africa and Nepal and things like that. And these schools are witnessing that effect as well. It's profound. There's a retired teacher in America called John Taylor Gatto, and he used to take his kids out of the classroom 4 days out of 5 in order to give them real life skills and experience in the adult world, in the real world. I think that's fantastic. Just the other day, I learned that the neocortex, which is the part of the brain that is responsible for conscious processing, is developing later and later and later. When my parents were teenagers, the neocortex, and this is the part of the brain that is associated with maturity and responsibility, this part of the brain was fully formed really by the age of about 17. You know what it is today? About 26. Because we're keeping our kids infantilised, we're preventing them from being responsible and really growing. There was something else that I wanted to give my children. My mother had been through the Holocaust, and she'd had such a traumatic childhood that she had a lot of questions about life, and she accrued a very interesting library. And that library included books with titles like The Power of My Subconscious Mind and Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And as a teenager, I began to read these books. And I was hooked because they contained stories, inspiring stories about people who had health problems or relationship problems or financial problems, who would declare a certain kind of statement, either aloud or silently or in writing, and they'd do this over a period of time, and their circumstances would be transformed. And I became fascinated by the power of the word, that we can use language to create imaginary worlds for the purpose of entertainment, like the stories I'd been writing. And we can use language to deliberately create our reality, the world that we're living in. And so my fascination was such, I began to read and learn about the mind and our potential and attitude. And we all know the attitude is a very powerful thing. With a good attitude, you can accomplish almost anything, right? But some of the stories I was reading in my mother's books were really, to me, they were bordering on magic. For example, there was a story about a woman whose wrist had been damaged so badly that she was told she would never have the full range of movement. It would always be a bit stiff, a bit sore, and she should just get used to that idea. Well, she didn't like that idea, so she chose a different idea. And she came home from the doctor with her arm in a cast, and from that day she began to sing a daily song of gratitude for the perfect healing of her wrist. 12 weeks later, when she went to get the cast off, Her wrist was perfectly healed. She had the full range of movement, no stiffness, no soreness, and the doctor said that is not medically possible. There was another woman, and this woman had arthritis through her whole body. And she'd been learning that intelligence is not just in the brain, it's in every cell of the body. And so she began to address her body and tell it to heal. And 12 months later, she was completely clear of arthritis. Now, those stories struck me as being really magic. There was a story about an Indian fellow who wanted to move from India to America. He didn't have the funds, he didn't know how he was going to do it. And so he began to do that, and it so happened that an American fellow came to India and hired him as a tour guide. And they got on so well that when the American was ready to go back home, he said to the Indian guy, I want you to come with me and work for me as my chauffeur. And he paid his way, passport, visa, the whole thing. And again, I thought, that's just like magic. But what is magic? When we look at our microphones and our remote controls and our aeroplanes, all of our Western inventions, don't you think that to someone from a simpler society, they all look like sheer magic? Because when we don't understand and appreciate the laws and the principles behind something, we call it magic. But laws and principles in science there are. And I believe we're entering an era that has already been called the age of imagination, when our mastery of some of these laws is going to enable us to realise some of our wildest dreams. And your children and grandchildren are at the forefront of that era, and the young ones are too. Well, scientists are telling us that we are only using a fraction of our potential. What if the blueprint for a human being is that we each have the brilliance of Einstein, the physical stamina and flexibility of an Olympic gymnast, and ESP to boot? What if at the very least it is that we are living lives that we love, that make our hearts sing? What if there are laws and principles behind living a masterful life? What if there are simple strategies that anyone can apply? And what if when we don't, that's when we live lives of struggle and difficulty? Well, a few years ago, I was definitely not living my dreams. I was on the verge of separation, my kids were squabbling all the time, and I'd given up on my dream of being a published author. And my dream when I had my children, when I started educating, that I would pass on these inspiring ideas to them while I was living like a victim. Today, each of those areas is completely transformed. My husband and I are closer than ever, our kids are very close, and they're all living empowered lives. And I'm the author, an award-winning author of 4 books, one of which is this award winner, an Australian bestseller. I received amazing feedback from readers all around the world. My programs are now that are based on the book The Mastery Club are being taught around the world. So how do they go from struggling housewife to award-winning author with an empowered family and the beginning of an international organisation? Well, the answer is at the core of this issue about education. Of what use are academic skills and an academic education if we do not know how to create a rich and meaningful life, if we do not know how to realise our potential? I realised that I had been reading these books of my mother's, which had these stories about inspiring people and the statements they would make, and I'd been approaching it in a very immature way. I thought I could just say one or two of these sentences and then look around and the world would change, But personal transformation requires personal transformation, that we change, that we grow. And so I began to recommit myself, because what we're called to do is to take our attention away from the appearances of struggle and difficulty in our lives, to see the invisible, hear the silent, and do the impossible, to take action on our dreams. And so I began to declare some statements every day while I was out walking the dog in the park. And I would say, my words and thoughts determine my destiny. I am in charge of my words and thoughts. The faster I change my language to empowering phrases, the faster I transform my life. And I'd say it's walking around, 10 each and then more, And I would sit at home visualising my family in a loving hug,
even on the other side of the wall, they're screaming and carrying on, and you know, it can sound like a loving family. And I did this until I had tears of gratitude. And I stepped back from the business that I was in at the time, distributing health products, in order to write, because that was what was in my heart. And magic began to happen in my life. You know, has it been easy for me to create this change? Not at all. You know, it's been challenging and difficult. Has it been worth it? Absolutely. Would I follow my heart again? Absolutely. Has it been easy to home educate my children? Not at all. I was riddled with doubts and it was a very emotional journey, but has it been worth it? Absolutely. We have 3 mature young adults now who are each acting on their dreams. You know, my daughter at one point, she failed her driving test. Now that was a gut-wrenching experience for an 18-year-old whose twin sister passed, right? But my kids have learned that when they're faced with challenges, they will learn to go look for the meaning. What is this telling them? What are the blessings? What are the gifts? How does it serve them? And so she went to look for that stuff. And she found how the experience served her. She got to the point of being grateful that she failed. She went back and sat the test again and passed. My son had one client, his savings were going as he was trying to build this new business. And he was getting desperate. So he started to apply these principles, changed his mindset, transformed his situation. Within a week or 2, he walked into his dream opportunity. I think, you know, these are very exciting and empowering things to observe, and this is what we're doing with the Mastery Club books and programs. We're teaching kids these skills and these laws and principles, and the key, that self-mastery is the key, you know, that these laws, when we apply them in our lives, enable us, no matter how challenging life looks, no matter how challenging our circumstances, there is a hidden order at work. And when we work with these laws and principles, we can create the lives of our dreams. What if schools prioritised these laws, these principles, learning how to realise your goals and dreams, understanding how the mind works? What if schools focused on following your heart and your dream and your soul instead of just getting good grades? There's a man called Howard Thurman, and he says, do not look for what the world needs. Ask yourself, what do I love? What will make me come alive, and go and do that? Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Jerry Gilly says, you will recognise your path when you're on it, because you will have more energy and imagination than you can imagine. What if aliveness and the ability to realise our goals and dreams was the criteria of a sound education rather than good grades? How would our world look, sound and feel? Thank you. And see if you have any questions.